All right. Welcome, everybody. I am so excited to talk to you today about the fertility apps, the tools that can support your fertility or hinder your fertility in some cases. And we will be talking to you about those tools today. Sorry, I'm just looking for my screen share. Screen share. Okay, cool. So I want to introduce Dr. Amy, who is the founder of a company called UVA, and she's got 10 years of experience as a data scientist. So before this company, she was doing lots of data analysis and things like that. And data scientists are really cool because they see patterns that we as clinicians don't often get to see because they're just seeing bulks of numbers, right? So this is a really good thing. And then she's published her own research in the areas of personal genomics and biomarker diversity. So that's also like incredible accomplishments. And maybe she'll share her story with us. She did have some struggles conceiving, and UVA is the birth of her other baby that she created in the process of going through the fertility journey and just being frustrated with what was out there. So, Dr. Amy, would you like to share a little bit about that journey with us?
Sure. I will also caveat this with I don't know if many people would describe a data scientist as super cool. I think we're usually the nerds that sit in the back that just love playing with numbers and coding.
I describe it as super cool because I'm a geek that just loves data, right? So
yeah,
I'm sifting through research studies, and I'm like, oh, someone had to like put all this together in a way that makes sense. So that's you guys.
Well, I am a proud nerd, so I will own that with all my heart. So, we founded UVA because I personally experienced a difficult time conceiving. And now, after starting UVA, I've really realized that my journey is not so unique, and it actually is very similar to a lot of other couples. So I'm more than happy to share my story. I've had irregular cycles my whole life. And when I say irregular cycles, I'm super irregular. Like we're talking maybe 3 to 5 periods a year, all different lengths. Like I was all over the spectrum. Sometimes my bleed would be so heavy that I would become anemic. And my husband and I were both in our 30s. I've also been diagnosed with celiac disease. So we felt like there was a wall already kind of being built up for us to have to jump over to become a parent. And we had a pretty tough conversation early on that if we did not conceive naturally, we did not want to go the invasive route. It was actually easier for me to make peace with possibly never being a mom than it was to go through a failed cycle or potential miscarriage. I honestly just didn't think I could deal with that loss. So we started doing everything right. I mean, to be honest, I was in the best shape of my life during that period. I was in the best health. I was using every fertility tracking app that was out there. I took my BBT every morning. I used every ovulation stick I could get my hands on. Like I'm talking about all the ones on Amazon. I bought a ton of Clear Blues. Like God knows how much money I spent in the months it took me to get pregnant. Probably would have been cheaper to just go through an IVF cycle, but I don't know if I can emotionally deal with that. And luckily, after all this, I conceived my son. It took 18 months, but those 18 months were honestly the most devastating of my life. And the worst part was that after I collected all this data, I mean, you mentioned I'm a data scientist, so I was literally collecting numbers and tracking every single thing. It was like my second full-time job, just monitoring what my progress was every day. I didn't learn anything. All I really found was that I had irregular cycles, and I knew that going into this whole journey. So I tried to hack those tools to work for me, and I think we might touch on that a little bit in this talk, but I found that they were basically hardwired for women who had that perfect cycle, and that wasn't me. Mm-hmm. So that's really where the idea for UVA was born, because I realized that my reproductive system is dictated by hormones. And if I knew how my hormones are behaving, I would know where I was in my cycle, and I know what to do and when to do it. And so we created UVA, which really empowers women with information about their hormone levels and their cycle, I think we can dive into it a little bit more further in your talk, Mama.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for sharing your story with us. So, a little about me. If you guys don't already know me, I've been in practice for 15 years. My background is as a naturopathic doctor, and I specialized in fertility after my own struggles with um, really being married to the wrong person and realizing after getting married that I really had no intention to have children with this man. And yet I realized in the process, I was like, actually, I do want kids. It's just not with him. Um, so I had a little bit of a wake up call like 2 years into our marriage. I was like, oh crap, the clock is ticking. I'm about to be 35. What is happening? And I realized in the process of being in my own journey with it that really what I had learned in medical school was that at 35, our fertility declines basically like the same status quo that Western medical doctors are trained in. So we didn't really have alternative training or like more holistic training. And then I started looking for naturopathic doctors that specialized in fertility, and there were maybe three. This is like 8 or 9 years ago. So it's been a while. There are way more now. But when I realized that there are so few doctors, I was learning all of this information that was blowing my mind, really. Like, I would read the research papers and was like, why are we telling women their fertility declines at 35? It's not actually true. So I just started sharing it, and people would like interview me on podcasts or whatever, and I would just be like, yeah, it's bullshit. Like, it's just bullshit. I don't believe this stuff. I don't know why we keep telling women this. The mentality of you can't get pregnant and then like feeding into that from the medical perspective, it's just like heartbreaking. And that, and then all of a sudden people were reaching out to me like, great, can you help me get pregnant? And I was like, oh no, this is all theory. um, and finally, like, long story short, people kept asking, and finally I was like, the first client that I took in for fertility, I was like, listen, we charge a lot of money. I don't have a track record. I don't have a success rate. I've basically never worked with a fertility person in my life. But if you still want to work with me, call me Monday morning. And she called Monday morning and was like, I'm really clear that you're going to help me, and you're probably the only person to help me. But you're a little crazy. And I was like, well, I just want to be honest, like, I don't want you coming into this thinking like I have all these success stories and whatnot. Um, and she kind of put her trust in me. She'd had 3 miscarriages at the age of 33. She was struggling with like recurrent loss, a lot of grief. She ended up going on to get pregnant, and then patients just kept flooding in, and I was like, okay, sure, we can try. Let's see if this works with other people. And really quickly we realized that everyone that we were working with between like 30 and 40, 43-ish, was getting pregnant relatively efficiently without a lot of need for interventions. And that's when I started getting really excited, and we kind of like created this whole fertility success system, which is kind of core to all of the work that we do these days. So that's a little bit about me and why I got into this, or how I kind of fell into this. And what I've realized over the years is there are a lot of people that are using apps. And like I said, I said a little bit earlier, but I think it was before we started recording, the number of people that are using apps that don't work is really high. So a lot of these apps are out and they're like, oh, we help you do this, and we track your fertility, and we're telling you when you're ovulating, and it's based on special algorithms. And in reality, like, I've seen almost all of these apps, people come to us and are like, I'm still not pregnant. Why is this not happening? What am I doing wrong? And I look at them and I'm like, it's not you, it's the app. And so we'll talk a little bit more about how some of these apps are different, how you can kind of support your fertility journey with the right tools at the right time to really like blow open your awareness of how these how your hormones are shifting through your cycle, and really like getting a more deeper understanding of what's happening in your body in order to like help support the conceiving process. So that's kind of where I come at with this. We don't have a sales pitch. There's nothing like, sure, absolutely, you can buy UVA. I think Dr. Amy already put in the code for you guys. So we have a little discount if you guys are interested in buying that. But really, like, I'm saying that from the perspective of we're not trying to sell you anything, right? Like, the end goal of this is really education and awareness around what tools are out there and what is getting in your way. And someone's not on mute, so I'm going to do that. All right, so that is to start. I think what we would love to know is what apps have you guys used? So if you want to chat into the chat box, tell us what you've been using or what apps you're using right now. And Kindara, yeah, that's a good one. And we'll talk about the pros and cons. I think there are pros and cons to a lot of apps. So Pre-Mom, that one I haven't heard of. Clue and Pre-Mom. Okay. Kindara, great. Cool. A lot of Kindara and Pre-Mom. Pre-Mom, I don't know. Do you know that one, Dr. Amy? Okay, cool.
Sorry, I put myself on mute.
That's okay.
Yeah, actually, that one's interesting because it allows you to take pictures of your ovulation sticks, and
Okay.
it tries to interpret them.
Huh.
But we can talk about that a little bit more later on in the talk. I think it's interesting what they've built.
Yeah. Flow. So Flow is a cool one because I really like the aspect of, shoot, I forgot the founder's name. She's really amazing. Oh, Alyssa Vitti. Um, the cool thing about Flow is not so much the tracking aspect, but the kind of recommendations that you get in your follicular phase versus your luteal phase. So there's this whole idea of like how to treat your body in rhythm with the phase of menstruation or the phase of your cycle that you're in. So I really like how they do that, and they do that really well. But I wouldn't consider it a fertility tracker so much. Cool. All right. So we have, it seems like Kindara, Pre-Mom, Flow, Clue, a thermometer. That one I don't know either. So there are a lot of apps out there, and I feel like by the time this presentation ends, there will be a flood more that pop into the market. That I'm exaggerating, but that is a little bit of how this fertility world is innovating, and technology people are innovating constantly to support the people that are struggling with fertility. So I think there's a lot of interest in this, and I think that we're going to see more and more apps come onto the market. So this by no means is meant to be extensive in terms of every app that's on the market. We just want to give you the foundation to be able to analyze and understand what your app is and isn't able to do, and what the pros and cons are. So we can talk about which. So there are many fertility apps. We kind of said that: Ovia, Glow, Flow, Eve, Clue, Kindara, Natural Cycles, Period Tracker. These are like barely touching the surface, I feel like, in terms of what all is available. What we can talk about more specifically is what exactly is your app basing its ovulation projections on? And what I have found to be the most misleading is that most of them are based on general timing or like a typical cycle for an average woman. And just even though they say they have special algorithms, it's kind of like they are basing these projections on kind of a general thing, and they're not actually personalized to each person or what's happening even from cycle to cycle with your hormones. Um, so I think that's really important to note, and it's really important. Like I was getting really excited about certain apps. Natural Cycles is one of them. I went and paid for a service for like 2 years or something because I was like, oh, this is so cool. And it's like, I think they got certified or something. They had some like FDA recognition at some point. um, and then I tried it out and I was like, this is lame. Sorry, I am not affiliated with companies, so I can say whatever I want. But it was lame from the perspective of the thermometer, which I feel like basal body temperature trackers are really effective and could be really amazing, but most of them are not using your basal body temperatures to the full extent that you could. The second thing about basal body temperature trackers is the biggest hurdle to people tracking their temperatures is that you need to remember to measure your temperature with a thermometer within like 30 seconds of waking up. If you move, you get on your phone and you get distracted, guess what? This is no longer going to be accurate. So, um, I, I when I got in the Natural Cycles app, I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. Like people keep complaining about how hard it is to track their BBTs. So I'm going to like go and do this. And I decided that for a month I would be tracking my temperatures. I It's really sad, but I was successful for 4 days out of the month. I actually took my temperature at the right time. 4 days out of a 30-day month. So, I quickly realized like there is this kind of I yes, BBTs are amazing. And yes, all of my clients use it because we kind of make them. So, whoever is working with me, you guys know, like I'm looking at your BBT charts. I've probably analyzed over like 1,000 at least BBT charts over the years. So, and I'm going to show you a chart in a second about understanding your hormones as well as your BBTs. Um, over the course of the years that I've been in practice. But trackers that use BBT, so Natural Cycles is one of them. What they did not do very well is actually give you a thermometer that's automated, right? Like we're in the age of automation. There's no reason why you still need to like put a thermometer under your tongue every morning and remember to do that. It's actually not even the most accurate way to measure temperatures. So, your BBT tracking devices, most of the time they're giving you a thermometer and then they're saying this app has a special algorithm to figure out when you're ovulating. There's some value to that, and there's a lot of deficiencies in that because an algorithm is not picking up on fluctuations in your follicular phase or the first part of your cycle. It's not actually tracking what's happening with the temperatures, and it what I'll show you is if your temperatures are changing in a certain pattern, your BBTs reflect that. So when you see a basal body temperature chart that in the first half of the cycle, you see this like up and down fluctuation of temperatures, there's actually a fluctuation of hormones that's getting reflected into the temperatures. But most apps are not doing that. So it's really up to you connecting with a practitioner who can take that data and understand it from the perspective of your whole hormonal system, not just a spike in temperature to indicate that you're ovulating. So I think that's the biggest
Dr.
deficiency.
Matna, can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah.
So for the BBT tracking, let's put the app's algorithms to the side. But if
Yeah.
you have irregular cycles,
Yeah.
how accurate is a BBT, and how difficult? I mean, what are the differences in the trends that you would see when you're looking at a chart?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So here is let's just go to this slide because it'll help kind of do a visual with this. So what you see at the top is the fluctuation of FSH and LH in the follicular part. And really the key for both of these hormones are in when we measure hormones in urine or in blood. So for fertility, we're usually doing day 3 hormones, and we want to see a kind of a 1-to-1 ratio of FSH and LH. What we'll see on blood tests for most people that have irregular cycles that might be related to PCOS or something like that, the LH will be much higher than the FSH. So right away, you can you don't even need to do the tracking. You can kind of see it on a hormone test. So that's the first step. The second step is when people have irregular cycles, it's not really the temperature that's showing you that the cycle is irregular, but over time, we'll see a woman with irregular hormones having like an 18-day cycle followed by a 60-day cycle followed by, like just a lot of variation. And most of the time, you won't see a clear peak temperature. So the temperature peak is often reflective of the LH peak. So actually, no, that's not true. So there's almost always a dip in temperature for one day and then a peak. So that dip is the LH peak, and the spike is the progesterone that's starting to peak in a woman's body. So what you'll see, the other part of this chart is the progesterone and estradiol or estrogen that's changing through the course of the cycle. And progesterone, most of you guys probably know this already, progesterone is going to peak just after ovulation, and it should continue to stay high through your luteal phase. So women with irregular cycles, this is the key right here. The LH often is not peaking. The ovulation often doesn't happen, or it's very irregular in how it happens. And if ovulation doesn't happen, or if the body doesn't have enough of a rise in LH, which is the indicator that it's time to release the egg, then the almost always that cycle will be a lot longer because the body never got a signal to release an egg, the uterine lining never built up the way that it should, and there won't be a shedding of lining because there was never a buildup of the lining. So it really extends out the cycle. And then when you release, maybe you release an egg that is really low quality, you'll see kind of truncated cycles. So instead of having a full like 28-day cycle or 26-day cycle, even, it might be like 20, I've seen like 18, 20, 22 days, which is a little too short to actually build up enough lining to potentially get pregnant. So did that answer the question, Dr. Amy? Okay, cool. The other thing, so what we notice is if you're doing basal body temperature tracking, most apps will really are just catching this peak day. So is the little like cursor showing on this? Okay. So the middle of like the smack middle of the cycle is where if you get an LH peak and follow with a progesterone peak, the basal body temperature tracker will catch that. Otherwise, you're not going to see anything. Like any other variant to this shift is basically going to show as either you didn't ovulate or it randomly picks your ovulation based on the halfway point of your cycle. And that's probably the biggest issue with the automated temperature trackers. The second piece of what I've been hinting at is most trackers ignore the fact that your FSH and estradiol through the follicular phase are going to, estradiol and FSH have an intimate relationship. FSH builds, and FSH is a follicle stimulating hormone. So it's creating a signal from your brain to your ovaries that your ovaries should produce follicles or eggs. These follicles will develop, and as more and more of them develop, as well as they're growing in size, they start releasing estrogen or estradiol. When that estradiol peaks, that's the signal to create the LH peak. So if you see that red line on the bottom chart, you see an estradiol peak just before the LH peak. So these hormones have a thermogenic effect in the body. And that's basically what the basal body temperature tracking has the ability to reflect as far as what's happening with your hormones. So normally we'll see FSH, estradiol, and progesterone in the second part of the cycle reflected in your temperatures and how those temperatures are fluxing either in the follicular phase or the luteal phase, depending on which hormone we're looking at. So I'm a big fan of basal body temperature tracking. It's one of the fastest ways for me to have feedback about specifically what's happening with FSH and estradiol. Believe it or not, I look at it less for the progesterone part, but more for the FSH and estradiol, because those hormones are really key to producing good quality eggs for ovulation. So if you have high FSH levels, you can just call that a wrap, right? Like you can maybe get pregnant in that cycle, but the quality of that egg is really low to start with. It's really unlikely that you're going to sustain that pregnancy. So when we see high FSH or high basal body temperatures in the first half of the cycle, we just like call it and say, don't even try this month. We don't want you to have a miscarriage. We are going to skip it. So what's really cool about temperature is you have this constant feedback of what's happening with the hormones. However, the progesterone part of this, or the LH and progesterone part of this, has been the missing piece as far as how much you can figure out progesterone levels or LH levels in getting reflected in your temperatures. You'll see a rise, but the rise isn't necessarily correlated. The temperature rise is not necessarily correlated with the levels of progesterone. So what's great is to use the basal body temperature in addition to some other device or app or tool that helps monitor that LH and progesterone through the rest of the cycle. So that's really where UVA comes in, and it's kind of a partnership made in heaven because it is that like other missing equation that we're not monitoring right now. So how are trackers different? Sorry, I went on kind of a big tangent with the hormones. I get so excited about hormones. So trackers are different from fertility apps. Fertility trackers are hopefully measuring or tracking some data through your cycle. And the things you can track are temperatures. We talked a lot about that. Urinary hormones, we're going to talk a little bit more about that, and changes in cervical mucus that are helpful to reflect or predict ovulation, and usually there's a shift in cervical mucus. I'll share a really cool device that's helping to track that. It's cool and it's a little bit challenging to use. So pros and cons. And then, Dr. Amy, do you want to talk a little bit about like the different measuring? You can measure saliva, urine, blood, etc.
Sure. Yeah, I think yeah. So they, like you said, they all these trackers have pros and cons. The one thing that like we've kind of always strove to do with UVA is to like make it extremely objective and remove any variables that are present. So, like for example, saliva, one of the big biomarkers that's typically tracked there is estrogen or estradiol, right? But the issue here with saliva is that it's like, think about it, your mouth, right? Like how easily it is to influence the environment in your mouth. Something as simple as brushing your teeth or like taking a sip of coffee, like that totally changes the entire environment. It will impact the results. So, and it's also a little questionable as to how well estradiol is correlated in blood versus saliva, but that is definitely one of the less invasive, I guess, fluids that you can use to track hormones. Urine is pretty good, is pretty great because one, it's completely non-invasive to get that. Two, it's like a perfect snapshot of what's going on inside your body. You can't really influence your urine too much, right? Obviously, yes, if you drink a liter of water, you can dilute your urine, you can dehydrate yourself. Like there's things like that you can do, but you'd be surprised how like predictable the urine is. So we can actually filter out a lot of the things that are in the urine to focus on the biomarkers that we care about. So I actually trust the urine test much more than, let's say, saliva, because it's a very clean fluid, to be honest. With blood, this is obviously the gold standard, right? Like you can get every single hormone in your blood. And that's where they live. They live in your blood. The problem, though, is it's an invasive. You can only get that result by being invasive, right? Now, there's obviously the intravenous blood draws that you can do, or you can do a finger prick. But the issue with the finger prick is that our hormones are pretty big, and it's very few can actually fit through a finger prick test. So you end up getting a very diluted response to how, like, some of the hormones that a lot of these tests are offering to measure, because they just won't fit in the finger prick sample capture. BBT we've talked about pretty heavily, and cervical mucus is great too. And maybe you can speak to this a little bit more, but what I found is that, like, I think cervical mucus is great. Like, it's definitely, your body is telling you exactly where you are in your cycle. It's basically outwardly telling you I'm fertile or I'm not. But what I found, and maybe it's because I'm just really off, but cervical mucus didn't help me much because I was so irregular. So I don't know how you kind of interpret the cervical mucus results if you have some with an irregular cycle. But we'd love your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's a great point. So cervical mucus, I find that a lot of clients have learned to do cervical mucus tracking, and a lot of the teachers of this method want you to like stick your fingers up and like get cervical mucus at your cervix, which is pretty deep. And I don't know about you all, but I am not a fan. I'm not doing that. I'm sorry. You're not going to get me to do this. So it's a little bit challenging from that perspective, but absolutely, so our method is use your cervical mucus, or at least like make note of your cervical mucus. And what's often happening is once your hormones click into place, cervical mucus will almost always be reflected during your ovulation time. So what I find is, especially with PCOS women or women that have high LH, high prolactin, they're going to see mucus all through the cycle. They're like, oh, I have cervical mucus all the time. And I'm like, yeah, and that's a little bit of a misnomer because it's not fertile cervical mucus, right? So you don't really know when it's changing because you have mucus all the time. And unless you're testing at the level of the cervix, you're not really catching those minor changes or fluxes that are happening. But almost always, once your hormones are clicked into place, cervical mucus comes along for the ride and is almost always going to get reflected. So it's a lot of patients are like freaking out early on in the process, and they're like, well, but my cervical mucus is still not getting on board, and I'm not sure if this is working. And my response is usually, cervical mucus will get on board, I promise, once your hormones are in gear. So cervical mucus is a great way to track your fertility if you're willing to do the hand up the vagina thing every day during your ovulation time. Or the way that we teach is just like wipe and seeing what kind of mucus is on your toilet paper is reasonable enough. But again, we're not using it like so scientifically. There is a device that I'll share later on that actually you can insert. And it's called a keg. It's a really cool idea. It has you doing Kegels while it's testing your cervical mucus quality. Um, so I was like, okay, yeah, that's pretty neat. Again, I don't know how many women are willing to do it, but it's a cool idea. And then just a comment about blood and saliva testing. So I'm a fan of both, because as I'll mention later, it's really like hormone testing is essential. Hormone testing doesn't go away with using any of these trackers. And I find that a lot of times people are using trackers or apps thinking, oh, this is all I need. I don't need a doctor. I don't need a way to like really understand my hormones. And I think that if you're on the fertility journey, or even if you're pre-fertility, meaning you want to get pregnant 2, 3, 5 years from now, you should like have a baseline of your hormones as much as you have like a pap smear every year, right? Like you go to your OB, you do your internal gyne checkup. You should really have a hormone checkup once a year. So that's really important. And then saliva testing is great for really specific conditions. So we use saliva testing like Dutch test in our practice for tracking hormones for 1 month to really understand if a woman is estrogen dominant, if we suspect it. So we don't make every patient do this, because if we don't suspect estrogen dominance or there's no real reason to do it, we won't, right? But it's great to see the hormones on a graph if we are concerned about a imbalance between the estrogen and progesterone. So it's really helpful in certain cases, but we really take it on a case by case basis. So a lot of people will come in and say, oh, I really want a Dutch test. And I'm like, yeah, and you don't need one. So save your money and your time. Like, it's not necessary for everyone, and it can be really helpful and key for certain conditions and certain types of situations. So we've talked quite a bit about temps already. So we'll talk about, natural cycles. They use a regular old thermometer. I was really unimpressed, like the thermometer doesn't even connect to their app automatically. So you still have to type in your temperatures, which is dumb. It's kind of like, why do I have this temperature and app? Yeah, I was really like, uh, irate about the fact that I had paid for this app. So my apologies, it's coming through. Temp Drop and iFert Tracker are automated temperature monitors. So you stick them, I think both of them are like, you stick them into your armpit at bedtime. You wake up in the morning, it will have sent a signal to the app to record the temperature when you woke up. So that, I think, at least is one step closer. Like, it takes away the need to remember to measure your temperature. And I feel like that's the biggest hurdle that most of our clients have with temperature tracking. So if you're struggling with that, one of those is great. We're like collaborating with iFert Tracker. So I'll give you a code at the end if you decide that's the one you want to get. We have some discount codes. The Ava bracelet, I had to put this in here because it's so popular, and they tout like amazing fertility results by using this bracelet. Um, I do believe that people are not lying. They got pregnant after they started using a bracelet, but I have a hard time believing that it's actually basal body temperature tracking. So, if you're wearing a thermometer on your wrist, that is not a basal body temperature. It's just not. Your basal body temperature has to be at the core of your body, which means the part that's the warmest. Putting it on your wrist, I have some amazing clients, honestly. This woman, I have two patients actually who got the bracelet and a thermometer, and we did a side by side, like they would do both. And it was distinctly a 1 degree difference between the bracelet and the thermometer, and the bracelet did not catch the spike. And I was like, okay, well, we have proven that this is not the most effective way to track your basal body temperature. So it just doesn't, it's not as fine tuned enough for how we like to understand your temperatures from the perspective of hormones. So I've kind of encouraged people, if they're using the AVA bracelet, they should probably move to a different device because it's not as informative as we would like, as far as what is happening with your hormones. And it's not a basal body temperature.
So, Dr. Amatma,
Yeah.
on the AVA bracelet, actually. So yes, they do monitor BBT, or I should say, I guess you can also temperature, because I agree with you. BBT needs to be more towards the core.
Yeah.
But they also monitor other features as well, such as pulse rate and what is it, like sweat, like all these other things.
Is it like quality of sleep also that's getting measured and stuff?
Yeah. So I actually, I don't know if you saw their clinical trial that came out like a while ago, but they looked at all the different, you should check that out. They looked at all the different features that they track, and it seemed that only pulse rate was borderline significant in detecting ovulation. So I'm not surprised that the BBT missed it.
Right.
I don't think that their BBT is as accurate as it's meant to be, but I think they're mostly focusing on the other factors that they're measuring as well.
Oh, interesting. Okay, cool. I did not know that part. That's awesome.
You should look into that study. I think you'll like it.
Okay, yeah, I'll definitely check it out. Okay, so the non-BBT trackers, there's the traditional LH strips. This like pee on a stick tells you when you're ovulating by the release of LH in your urine, or LH metabolites, I guess, in the urine. That is a traditional method. I think there are way better methods at this point, so we're going to leave that. KEG is the thing that I mentioned. It's literally like an egg that you insert vaginally. It has you doing Kegel exercises while it measures your cervical mucus. Modern Fertility is really interesting. We partner with them for their lab testing, but they've also just released LH strips, which you can like scan into your app. So I think it's similar to the other device that you were talking about, Dr. Amy. I can't remember the name of it. There's some other that's also doing that.
It was Premom.
Premom. Okay, cool.
Premom app.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's pretty similar to that modern fertility LH monitoring. There's Prove testing, which is I've had a few patients who I was equally excited to be like, oh, let's measure your progesterone more regularly so that we know that you're producing progesterone. But I think Dr. Amy can probably say more about this. Oh, and there's a typo on this. This is not ovia, you guys. This is uva. Sorry. I'm going to change that because that's going to bug me. Cool. So
that's the beauty of digital presentations. You can do things right on the spot.
Yes, and it's like really key to our presentation, so I don't want it to be wrong. So Prove is doing progesterone testing, but from what I understand, it's like a really low, or it doesn't detect it super well, and it's not measuring the quantities of progesterone, right? So you're going to have some flux, and if it's not measuring quantity, you don't really know how well the progesterone is being produced. You just know if it is or isn't. So that's been the biggest kind of con of the proof testing. And I think they're getting kind of popular, but I think it's a really important thing to note that it's not as informative as things could be. And then there's UVA, which I think is one of the best because it combines this LH and progesterone testing, but it also is, it gives amounts. So it's more quantitative rather than yes or no. It's kind of like more exact and helps from the clinician side, helps me know not only that you have progesterone, but that it's actually at good levels. So, Dr. Amy, maybe you want to talk a little bit more about these non-BBT trackers and what you think about them.
Sure. Yeah, I think so. My biggest pain point with like the LH strips and like the progesterone testing that's currently on the market is that they're all qualitative. So, like we were talking about earlier, because I have irregular cycles, these tools never really worked for me. And what that means is that I never really got a positive on the LH test at the time. And to be quite honest, I didn't do much testing with Prove while I was going through my journey. I don't think they were as available, and
I
honestly, I
don't
didn't
think
know
they
about
were
them when
around.
I was going through.
Yeah, I don't think I think they're
Yeah, that
pretty
we're talking
new.
about. Okay. But I did use like every LH strip that was available. And I never got a positive. And I mean, it's pretty weird to think that you're not ovulating for 18 months, right? Um, and so when I used UVA, I found out why I was getting that negative all the time. It's because my LH surge is just really low. And because I get that progesterone measurement too, I knew I was ovulating because I saw the rise in progesterone happen. So for me, normal is just very low, and I just never hit their threshold. So that's my biggest qualm with the qualitative test, because if you don't hit those thresholds, you're never going to get that positive. And if you're always above those thresholds, you're always going to get a false positive. I'm familiar with KEG and with cervical mucus. I think it's interesting what they've developed, but like for me personally, I'd be very nervous to put anything in that area, especially when I'm trying to conceive. I want that to be as pure as possible. So that's just like, that's me personally. But I think it's interesting that they're figuring out a way to interpret the cervical mucus in an objective way instead of making it subjective, saying, is it sticky white? Is it egg white? Like, what does it feel like?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
I
with
agree
modern
with
fertility, yeah, with modern fertility, I think it's great that they've come up with this like blood test that monitors multiple hormones, and for the lab testing, but it is still a snapshot measurement of your hormones. And what's really critical about, especially LH and progesterone, when you're looking at them on your menstrual cycle, you want to see the behavior and the trend over time. That's where the value in those hormones are. But because getting that snapshot, it's so dependent on what cycle day you're on and where you are in your cycle to know what those levels mean, right? Like LH is it's a pulsatile hormone. It's fluctuating throughout the day, even forget day to day. There's a lot of variability that's happening with both progesterone and LH. So with the blood test, I think it's very specific to knowing what cycle day you're measuring on. And I'm pretty sure, Dr. Montman, you probably specify what day they should use the modern fertility test, right? Yeah, so that's
sorry,
definitely a
I
lot
have
more
myself
informative.
on mute. Yeah, definitely. That's really perfect because we're going right into the next piece of this. We do specify that if you're doing hormone testing, which again, I feel like every woman should have a baseline of their hormones on a yearly basis. And if you're trying to get pregnant, you may consider doing it every 6 months so that you can see, oh, my hormones are shifting. Or especially after 40, I feel like your hormones are shifting so quickly that if you're not having that technical measurement, you're kind of missing a little piece of the puzzle. So hormone testing is really important. I I I know that there are kind of the cons of something like modern fertility, which is you're not getting as accurate result as kind of doing it as a full blood test, right? It's a blood spot that you do at home. It like the convenience kind of outweighs for me the little like slight variation that you might have in comparing your blood spot to a full blood draw. So it's important to note because yes, we partner with them. Yes, we love them. And there are legit cons to certain things. And I just want to be clear that that exists. And I would like to echo what Dr. Amy just said is like hormone testing, as crucial as it is to understanding the full fertility picture, the trackers are really key to having that feedback loop happening on a month-to-month basis. So like think about your hormone tests or your blood tests for hormones as like a baseline and something that you monitor every 6 to 12 months. Something like UVA is feedback that you're getting month to month. And for me, it's as a clinician, I want to know that shifts are happening as we're putting people through our programs, right? So we're not like, we don't want to wait 6 months till you do your hormone test again. We want to see that changes are happening along the way. It's really encouraging from your side to say, hey, oh my God, like now I have progesterone. That's great. So getting that feedback is really important for you as the client to like be empowered and be encouraged that things are moving in the right direction, and for the clinician to know that hey, things are moving in the direction that we're expecting and the protocol is working, right? So that feedback loop is really important, and to do it in a quantitative way is, I would say, even more important. Like probably everyone has some L8 surge, probably everyone has some progesterone, right? Assuming that you have eggs, you're ovulating, assuming a baseline of things, the hormones are happening. But do we know how much it's happening, how much of these hormones are being released is really indicative of what's happening inside the body. So I think UVA is, I'm like really excited to partner with them, if you can't tell already, because it's one of the only ones on the market that is doing the qualitative measurement of LH and progesterone. And then I would combine that with a temperature tracker. So I personally am really like the data that I get from basal body temperature tracking. Most of the time people like all of our clients are like, whoa, you can tell that all from temperature, like how do you know? And I've tested myself enough after doing like so many readings of these temperatures to say, oh, your FSH is getting high, let's go. And we'll almost always test it in blood the next cycle and it'll be elevated. And then we have like, okay, we need to make some shifts with your protocols to make sure that we're keeping the FSH in line with where it should be and not getting elevated to the point where you're going to have poor egg quality. So the temperature tracking doesn't necessarily go away or get replaced. It's just like an additional tool that we're using in our practices. So those first three are like the tools and devices and things that you can do at home to help support your fertility. And if you need us to help support you, you can do a fertility insight session on our website. You can schedule for that and join us for the next webinar. I actually have one next week on Friday. So if you guys want more of hormones and how we do stuff and what is holistic fertility, we'll talk about all of that next week. So Dr. Amy, do you want to add anything to that? And then we can maybe take some questions.
No, I think being able to kind of merge all of these different technologies together and having you be able to kind of access that data is critical. So I guess out of all of the hormone tests that you listed, UVA is actually the only one that allows you to see the hormone data in real time. So if your patient is using, or your client is using this at home, they don't have to figure out what should I tell you or what do you need to know? You're getting all of the information on its
own. Jen, I don't know if you're seeing the comments, but Jen said she's on her third day of UVA and already love it. And now
thank
I
you.
also
I
know
hope
not
you
to
are
rely on my
interested.
Ava.
Oh, I wasn't saying that at all, but okay. Jen, I hope if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out on your results or anything.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, Dr. Amy, to your point of the clinician side, like really being able to track this data in real time is important. And like we don't have a lot of interfaces that are clinician driven that give us the data that we need. So most of the time, even basal body temperature trackers, I wish I had one that I could like log into a portal and see people's data. I don't. They send me like a snapshot of a chart, usually at the end of the cycle, and then I can say, oh, this is what's happening. Let's do this for your next cycle. So it is a little bit extra effort. And I really love that you guys have made this easy for clinicians to be able to access that data in real time and support people in a more integrative way. So thank you for that.
Absolutely.
Sunny asks how reliable is cervical mucus tracking. So from my perspective, I think that cervical mucus is one of the last markers that I like to use for fertility because really like I don't know if you caught that, like what I see from the clinical side is almost always when the hormones are aligned, cervical mucus matches. So it's never, there has not been a time in my practice where cervical mucus was so fertile and hormones were out of whack, right? Like that there is such a correlation between the two that for me it's more tangible to track hormones and understand the hormones and let the cervical mucus click into place. I know that there are practitioners out there who like are diehard cervical mucus fans and would love to see that tracking for their clients. I'm not one of them. I feel like it's way too tricky to monitor in a qualitative way. It's like it's based so much on interpretation that it's just not super useful for us as clinicians. Anything, what about your side, Dr. Amy? What do you think about how reliable cervical mucus tracking is?
I mean, I think if there's an objective way to understand like what the consistency of it is, that would be helpful. But right now, like it's really based off of okay, what does it feel like when you go like this?
Mm-hmm.
And it's subjective. A lot of fertility tracking is subjective. So in my mind, the more we can remove that subjectivity from the equation, the better the data and the information will be, and the more personalized we can actually make it too. But like I said, like cervical mucus was not indicative for me when I was trying to get pregnant because it's just too irregular.
Yeah, I agree. Mm-hmm. With inconsistent sleep and frequent wake ups throughout the night, would you recommend iFert Tracker or Temp Drop over attempting to use a basal body thermometer? Definitely. I think that at least I know iFert Tracker more intimately because I've talked to their scientists. And they are getting measurements multiple times through the night and then doing like some sort of average with a priority to the wake up time. So there is a little bit of like algorithm that they have in place to give the most accurate temperature. The con, I should have mentioned this, the con of iFert Tracker is, hey, great, it's measuring your temperature and like shooting it to the app. However, the app has some sort of like make the curve pretty that it doesn't actually give me your real data. So so for my clients, I usually have them use iFert Tracker if they need an automated thing, and then they'll go into the app to get me the actual temperatures. So there's a way to like get the legit temperatures and then they'll write it onto our chart to give it back to us. So it is a little bit unfortunate. One day I've like I have been on a track for years to create a basal body temperature tracker that actually does what I want it to do. So one day that will happen. But until it does, I don't have a perfect solution. But absolutely, I think if you have inconsistent sleep, a tracker is much better than a manual basal body thermometer. Are you saying that when we see the slippery, stretchy discharge in ovulating, discharge, I'm ovulating, I have regular periods? Yeah, so in theory, when you see the slippery, stretchy discharge, you are ovulating. That is correct. But what I will say from the clinical side is, one, make sure you have measured your hormones on day 3. And if you come to the webinar next week, I'll talk a lot about hormones and what the optimal levels are for each hormone. So you'll hear from the hormone side what should be happening on day 3 to actually make sure that you have the perfect balance of hormones to be able to conceive. So that's kind of the gist of hormones and ovulating. I have seen people who have slippery, stretchy discharge and they're not ovulating on the right day. So cervical mucus, again, can be a little misleading, because if you don't match the cervical mucus with your hormone measurements, you're still a little bit in the dark about whether that mucus is actually indicative of ovulation and of like a healthy cycle, even if you have regular periods. So you want to be careful with using just cervical mucus as your biomarker.
Dr. Amantma, I can add something to that. So completely agree with you on like kind of marrying the hormone data to that. So with UVA, and just to kind of give you some clarity on what's going on, in our app, you can actually track all of these different things. So cervical mucus, BBT, really you name it, we have it. We have over 35 different things. So what's great is, and what we're trying to do is actually take these variables that you can track on your own and marry that to what is normal for you on your hormone levels. So you'll know, like, if I have this slippery, stretchy discharge, is that when I'm having my LH peak or not? You'll be able to see that side by side. So I think that would be actually a really good thing for you, Sunny, to be able to see if this is what your ovulation cervical mucus looks like or not.
Yeah, absolutely. Chelsea, yes, we do have a discount code. That link is in this on this screen right now under BBT thermometer or tracker, and then that code under it, or that link under it, is the IFERT tracker link. I'll send all these links out in an email so it's easy for you to click on and not have to type it out. But if you want it, it's on the screen right now. Other questions? Okay, we got all the questions. We're done. No, just kidding. UVA sounds like something I would get. A couple of other questions. Are lubes safe, like S liquid? And how does one reduce FSH? So I can, from the perspective of trying to conceive, I think there are 2 lubes that are considered safe. Personally, I would rather you not use anything. So in the ideal world, in ideal fertility, you shouldn't need to, because when you are releasing cervical mucus and it's correlating with your ovulation, you're going to be really fluid down there. So that's the ideal case scenario. If you are still struggling with that cervical mucus production, pre-seed is the one that I know of that's been tested to be safe to not kill sperm. There is another one that's newer, and I cannot remember the name of it. I don't know if you know it, Dr. Amy.
I'm not familiar with lubes as much.
It's all good.
We don't typically recommend that people use them exactly for the reason that you suggested.
Yeah. So pre-seed, you can look into that. Unfortunately, I haven't looked into S liquid. I've not actually heard of that before. And then there's another one, which one day, one of these days it'll pop up on my radar again and I can remember the name of it. How does one reduce FSH? So that is a really tricky question. Your FSH is basically your brain is releasing this hormone to signal to your ovaries to produce eggs. As you age, FSH is going to get higher because your brain is starting to find that your ovaries are not as responsive. So it starts screaming at the ovaries. It's kind of like the bad boss who thinks that screaming at their employee is going to get them to work harder, because that almost never works, right? Same in our bodies, almost never works. So age-related FSH increase is kind of just challenging in general. When it's not age-related, like let's say you're in your 30s and you have high FSH, and I've seen this in quite a lot of patients where the FSH is like in the hundreds, that is almost always related to adrenal issues. So when I see an FSH that high, I almost always will say, have you had a lot of stress in your life? And almost always the response is yes. Oh my God, I've had like level 9, 10 stress through the last 10, 15 years of my life. So when we heal the adrenals, the FSH will go down. If your FSH is in the 15 to 20 ballpark, that is almost always related to age-related incline or ovarian failure. So that's where we get into the really tricky zone of, if your FSH is in that zone, your ovaries are literally like not responding, and it's not an easy fix. Let's just say that. Even for patients, it's not an easy fix. It's definitely not something that I would suggest trying to do on your own. Anything you want to add? I know I keep putting you on
No,
the
I think
spot.
that's perfect. No. I don't want to interrupt you because you're like summarizing it so well. No, I think FSH is a tricky one because it's like it has such a pivotal role in the cycle, and it's difficult to control really. But I think it's really indicative of what's going on with your cycle, the trends that you just described.
Yeah. Other questions?
You guys are all asking such good questions.
Yeah. Yay for empowerment. I really love for all women to be hormone aware. I feel like it's like a piece that doesn't get talked about often. We don't have any classes in school that help you learn your hormones. So
Yeah.
I talk about it all day long because I'm like, everyone should know this. I wish I knew this. So
I feel like health class kind of ended at leaving it women get hormonal and that was it. But
yeah,
like, what the heck does that mean? And
don't have sex because you're gonna get pregnant.
Exactly. That's not true.
Which is so not true. It's like, oh my God, if I had known through the earlier part of my life that in any given healthy cycle there was a 20% chance of getting pregnant, I would have had a much different childhood.
Right? Exactly. It's amazing. I think it's really unfair. Oh, go ahead. I think we got another question.
Oh yeah. FS8 is FS8 17 on day 1 likely to be lower by day 3? No, it's likely to be higher by day 3. So you should definitely have it retested on day 3. And I say this often, like fertility hormones are not to be looked at as one hormone. It's really like the conglomeration of all of these hormones to really understand what's happening with your fertility. So really it should be you should be getting everything tested, and by everything I'm usually referring to FSH, LH, estradiol, and AMH. Those are the main four. There are bonuses like testosterone and prolactin, and modern fertility kind of includes those. I will say their testosterone has been highly inaccurate. So we kind of just ignore it. Like it's helpful if there's a clear indicator, but if there isn't, we will get that tested if we absolutely need to. But the four crucial ones, I think they're relatively accurate for most people, and I find them useful to have all four. Curious what your thoughts are on prenatals and multivitamins. Doctors typically suggest those. Meh. Um, my perspective is, if your hormones are not in balance, I don't care what prenatal you're on. It's not helping you get pregnant. Like, yeah, it's a really good idea to make sure your nutritional levels are optimal before you conceive, but prenatals and multivitamin is not going to help you get your hormones in check. So, at least in our practice, because I believe in targeted nutritional therapy, right? Like we intentionally use specific things for specific results, and we want to see those results reflected back in what your hormones are doing. So that's step one. And then once we get closer to, okay, your hormones are like clicking into place, now let's put you on that prenatal as you start trying to conceive, is way more effective than having someone take a prenatal for months and months while we're still trying to address all the hormone imbalances. Your thoughts, Dr. Amy?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, even through our platform, we do make recommendations for several vitamins and supplements that we think could help regulate cycles, or alleviate symptoms that you might be reporting through our logging feature. But now, if you're trying to say like we're attributing those supplements to helping you get pregnant, I wouldn't agree with that. I would say that we are helping you kind of live your best life by helping you reduce symptoms, helping you adjust any abnormalities that are happening. Because we do agree that like everything is kind of dictated by your hormones, but we can start to kind of tackle those hormone imbalances by addressing the symptoms that you're reporting in the app.
Cool. Any other questions? All right. I think we have reached a nice pausing point for concluding today's webinar, or training, I should say. And if you want to join our next webinar that's coming up, it's next week at Friday at noon, West Coast time. So you'll find info for it on our website. The website /webinar is for signing up to get the info for that. And then there's another typo. It's work with us, not work with us, for the scheduling link. And I'll send out the links in a follow-up email today. So thanks, everybody. Thank you for being here and staying with us for this long. And we are really excited to support you. So thanks for being here.
Thanks, everybody.
And thanks, Dr. Amy, for joining me.
Of course, anytime.